The Atlantic, a cold expanse indifferent to human conflict, bore witness to a secret transit, a journey orchestrated in the labyrinthine depths of wartime strategy. It was the year 1942, and shadows, both real and metaphorical, began to lengthen across the American landscape, the very air thick with expectation and uncertainty. Not many knew, or could even imagine, that beneath the waves, steel predators prowled, carrying with them not the thunder of naval combat, but a more insidious cargo: men intent on disruption and chaos. These were not the battleships of overt aggression, but the stealthy U-boats, the silent harbingers of a covert war, delivering men and their dark purpose onto the unsuspecting shores of North America. It was a campaign of whispers, a clandestine invasion, with more psychological than military effect, designed to sow fear in hearts and fracture the national spirit. The operation, baptized with the ominous name Pastorius, was the brainchild of German military intelligence, a desperate gamble aimed at striking a blow against the industrial heart of the United States, an action born of frustration and a calculation. A calculation that America's entry into the conflict could be delayed or its resolve weakened through targeted sabotage. 8 men were chosen, each a piece in a meticulously constructed plan, and they were prepared. Their faces were etched with ambition. Their hands, though still, were eager to set their training to violent purpose. They were students of destruction, graduates of the dark arts of explosives and subversion. The individuals selected were not merely soldiers. They were ghosts from America's past, men who had once walked its streets, breathed its air, perhaps even pledged allegiance to its flag, yet now returned as enemies, their loyalties twisted, their souls poisoned by ideology. These were not naive recruits. They were veterans of a different kind of war, the battle for hearts and minds, fought in beer halls and propaganda rallies. They were hardened men, veterans of ideology, steeped in the rhetoric of hate and division. Each man carried a carefully forged identity, a passport to deception. The tools of their treachery were meticulously assembled: false papers, convincing accents, and a deadly arsenal of explosives and incendiaries. They were equipped to blend into the American landscape, to become invisible agents of chaos, their true purpose masked behind carefully constructed facades. The targets were chosen with cold calculation: hydroelectric plants, metal factories, transportation hubs, the vital arteries of American industry, and the sites were strategically positioned for maximum impact, designed to cripple production and incite panic. Beyond the grand targets, however, lay an even more insidious objective: to ignite a campaign of terror, to plant bombs in public spaces, to shatter the sense of security, to cripple the economy and destabilize society. The man entrusted with, trusted, leading this audacious mission was George Dash, a figure shrouded in contradiction and shadowed by a murky past. He was a veteran of the trenches, the killing fields of the First World War, a man hardened by the horrors of combat, and he possessed the experience and ruthlessness necessary for the task at hand, or so it was believed. He had known America intimately. He had once worn its uniform, pledged to protect its values, and yet he had abandoned his allegiance, his family, to return to the fold of his motherland, driven by a complex mix of disillusionment and fanaticism. Dash had served in the US Army, a detail that added an ironic twist to his betrayal, highlighting the porous nature of identity and loyalty in a world at war. He'd left America once, leaving behind a wife and child, a shattered life. Now he returned as a serpent in the garden. The team was divided into 2 units, each a mirror image of the other, reflecting the same dark intent. Dash's group consisted of men forged in the crucible of Nazi ideology. They were warriors of hate, prepared to sacrifice everything for the cause. Ernest Berger was a former Freikorps member, a veteran of the street battles that had scarred Germany in the aftermath of the First World War. His history was a tapestry woven with threads of violence and fanaticism. He had tasted the heady brew of political extremism early in life, and his trajectory was set, unswerving in its devotion to the Nazi cause. He had even participated in the infamous beer hall putsch, a failed attempt to seize power, and his devotion had been tested. He had suffered for his beliefs, enduring imprisonment in a concentration camp. The experience, rather than tempering his zeal, had only hardened his resolve, confirming his conviction that the Nazi ideology was the only path to salvation. Richard Quirin, a mechanic from Berlin, added a technical edge to the team, a man skilled with his hands, capable of turning ordinary objects into instruments of destruction. He had lived in America, worked in its factories, witnessed its prosperity, and yet he had chosen to return to Germany, drawn back by the siren call of nationalism, his heart consumed with hatred for the land that had once offered him opportunity. Heinrich Heinck, a fellow worker, completed the quartet. His past mirrored Quirin's, a life lived on both sides of the Atlantic, a soul torn between two worlds. He was a cog in the machine of the German war effort, a willing participant in the dark enterprise that was about to unfold. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and the curtain was about to rise on a drama of espionage, betrayal and destruction. A chapter in the history of the war, the story of a secret war, a whisper in the shadows destined to unfold far from the front lines. On the very soil of the United States. Their arrival was an intrusion, a violation of the peace, an embodiment of the war's reach, and they hoped to spread its terrors and reap a bitter harvest. The moon cast long, skeletal fingers of light across the deserted beach. The Atlantic waves rolled in, hissing against the sand, a symphony of solitude and deceit. On this remote stretch of Long Island shoreline, under the cover of darkness, the U-202 surfaced like a sea monster from the deep, its steel hull glinting menacingly in the moonlight. From its depths emerged the first team, the vanguard of Operation Pastorius. They were clad in the uniforms of German sailors, a calculated gamble intended to afford them a degree of protection should their mission fail. The uniforms were removed, and they assumed their false identities, their new lives in America. The waves rocked a small rubber boat, laden with suitcases filled with civilian clothes and the tools of their dark trade, boxes of explosives, detonators, and the currency of sabotage, American dollars, all representing the cold, hard price of destruction. The beach landing was fraught with tension. The men were aware of the risks. The possibility of discovery loomed large, and their safety depended on stealth, precision, and a healthy dose of luck. The buried uniforms were an act of deception, a charade designed to mislead. The evidence that would label them spies, and the U-boat lingered, a dark presence just offshore, a silent accomplice in the drama unfolding on the beach. Then came the encounter, a stroke of fate, or perhaps divine intervention. A single Coast Guardsman, patrolling the lonely stretch of shoreline, stumbled upon the four Germans, disrupting their carefully laid plans. The Coast Guardsman was unarmed, a symbol of America's unpreparedness, or perhaps its naivete, a lone figure standing between the saboteurs and their mission. Dash, ever the pragmatist, attempted to bribe the Coast Guardsman, offering him a share of the vast sum of money they carried, a desperate attempt to buy his silence, to ensure the mission's survival. The Coast Guardsman, faced with a moral dilemma and a potential threat to his life, accepted the bribe, taking the money and promising to forget what he had seen. It was a moment of profound consequence, a choice that could have altered the course of the war. However, the Coast Guardsman, driven by a sense of duty, or perhaps by a nagging guilt, could not ignore his conscience. As soon as he was clear, he reported the incident to the authorities, shattering the saboteurs' fragile illusion of security. The news spread like wildfire, a spark igniting a conflagration of fear and suspicion. Alerts were sent, and the beach was soon swarming with law enforcement officers, hunting for the intruders who had dared to trespass on American soil. The Germans, having vanished into the night, left behind the evidence of their presence, and it was not long before searchers uncovered the buried uniforms and the hidden cache of explosives. Their deception was exposed, their mission compromised. The discovery triggered a massive manhunt, and the FBI was mobilized, an army of agents fanning out across the country, determined to capture the saboteurs and prevent them from carrying out their deadly plans. The hunt for the saboteurs was on, a race against time, and the fate of the nation hung in the balance. Meanwhile, the U-boat still lurking offshore found itself trapped, stranded on a sandbank, a sitting duck, its vulnerability exposed, and they waited for the tide, praying to escape before discovery. Dash and his team, oblivious to the chaos they had unleashed, boarded a train to New York City, seeking refuge in the anonymity of the metropolis. They sought to lose themselves in the crowds, to melt into the urban landscape, their past and purpose masked beneath the veneer of ordinary citizens. In their hotel room, Dash confessed his doubts to Berger, revealing his intention to abandon the mission and surrender to the authorities, seeking redemption for his past transgressions, but seeking also to save his own skin. He hoped to strike a deal, to trade information for immunity, believing that his knowledge of the plot would be his salvation. Berger, swayed by Dash's arguments, or perhaps by his own growing unease, agreed to join him, willing to betray his comrades in the hope of a better future. While Dash wrestled with his conscience, the second team, aboard U-584, was approaching the Florida coast, their mission mirroring that of their counterparts in New York. The operation, conceived in darkness, now teetered on the brink of disaster, threatened by betrayal and incompetence, an ominous sign of the events to come. They too landed under the cover of darkness, 4 men stepping onto American soil, cloaked in deception and armed with deadly intent. The members of the Florida team, under the command of Edward Curling, dispersed, travelling to different cities, their individual missions yet to begin, but their rendezvous point prearranged, a gathering in Cincinnati on the 4th of July, where they would finalise their plans and unleash their destructive potential. The stage was set for a clash between good and evil, between order and chaos, and the outcome remained uncertain. The American people completely unaware of the danger lurking in their midst. Dash, driven by a mixture of fear, guilt, and self-preservation, resolved to contact the FBI. He chose the audacious route, a telephone call to the New York field office, hoping to speak to someone who would believe his story and appreciate the urgency of the situation. However, his initial attempt ended in frustration. The agent on the other end dismissed him as a crank, a delusional crackpot, and abruptly terminated the call, leaving Dash in a state of desperation. Undeterred, Dash decided on an even bolder course of action. He travelled to Washington, D.C., determined to reach the highest echelons of the FBI, to expose the plot and secure his own redemption. His train journey was a passage through a land he was bent on, betraying, its landscape seeming to challenge his betrayal, the ordinary citizens going about their lives ignorant of his treason. Meanwhile, the Florida team, unaware of Dash's defection, moved forward with their plans, each man pursuing his assigned tasks, their actions shadowed by the looming threat of discovery. Curling, the team leader, was an engineer by training, a man of precision and logic. He was, however, also a man of deep conviction, his belief in the Nazi ideology unshaken by his years in America, a double life lived in the shadows of his own heart. Herbert Hapgood, a former American citizen, carried a burden of guilt and conflicting loyalties, a man torn between two worlds, his past haunting his present. He yearned to return to his family, to reclaim his lost identity, but he was trapped in a web of his own making. He'd sailed on a German merchant ship as a blockade runner, braving the Royal Navy, proving his commitment to Germany. Hapgood reached out to his father, revealing his presence in the United States, but cloaking his true purpose, claiming to be on business for the German government, a deception that strained their relationship, casting a shadow of doubt and suspicion over their reunion. The other members of the Florida team, Herman Neubauer and Werner Thiel, moved through the country like phantoms, their intentions hidden, their presence unnoticed, their actions guided by a single purpose: to inflict damage and sow chaos. Each step they took was a step closer to disaster, each action a thread in a tapestry of betrayal and destruction, and they left a trail of deception wherever they went. Dash arrived in Washington, D.C., and walked into the headquarters of the FBI, a lone figure amidst the corridors of power, his fate hanging in the balance. He was interviewed by Assistant Director D.M. Ladd, who listened to his story with a mixture of skepticism and intrigue, unsure whether to dismiss him as a madman or to take his claims seriously. Dash, desperate to prove his sincerity, revealed the vast sum of money he carried, laying it on the table as evidence of his defection, a tangible symbol of his betrayal and a desperate plea for credibility. He then proceeded to reveal everything he knew, laying bare the details of Operation Pastorius, exposing the identities of his fellow saboteurs, and revealing their intended targets, and his betrayal was complete. Dash became the canary, singing the song of treachery, and the FBI listened, piecing together the puzzle, mobilizing its resources to capture the remaining members of the team. J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, seized the opportunity, recognizing the potential for a major public relations victory, eager to bask in the glory of thwarting a major enemy plot. The manhunt intensified, fueled by Dash's information, and the net began to close around the unsuspecting saboteurs. Each man oblivious to the fact that his comrades had betrayed him, their mission doomed, and their fate sealed. The FBI, armed with Dash's detailed information, moved swiftly to apprehend the remaining members of Operation Pastorius. The saboteurs were rounded up, one by one, their plans thwarted, their dreams of destruction shattered, and their illusions of invincibility destroyed. They had come to America as agents of chaos. They were now prisoners of fate, their destinies intertwined with the decisions of a nation at war. Hoover, the master of public image, orchestrated a media spectacle, portraying the capture of the saboteurs as a major victory for the FBI, a testament to its vigilance and effectiveness, eager to claim credit for dismantling the German operation. He sought to reinforce his own power and to reassure the American people that they were safe and secure and that their protectors were on watch. However, Hoover's self-aggrandizing actions came at a price. He reneged on his promise of immunity to Dash and Berger, betraying his word and leaving them to face the full wrath of the law despite their cooperation. The Attorney General, acknowledging the complexities of the case, admitted that the most the saboteurs could be charged with was conspiracy, an offence carrying a relatively light sentence. He hoped for a more stringent sentence to be carried out. Given that two of the saboteurs, Berger and Hapgood, were American citizens, they could be tried for treason, a crime punishable by death. But the Attorney General's recommendation to President Roosevelt was more lenient. Roosevelt, however, driven by a sense of justice and a determination to send a message to the enemy, rejected the Attorney General's advice and demanded that the saboteurs be punished severely and publicly. The President believed that the two American citizens had committed the ultimate betrayal and deserved to be held accountable, and he was determined to make an example of them, to deter others from following their path. On July 2, 1942, Roosevelt issued an executive proclamation creating a military tribunal to try all 8 saboteurs, bypassing the civilian courts and ensuring a swift and decisive outcome. The trial was held in the Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C., a spectacle of justice, a stage for national catharsis, and a demonstration of American resolve. The military tribunal, composed of high-ranking officers, heard the evidence, weighed the arguments, and deliberated in secret, their decision guided by the exigencies of war and the demands of national security. On August 3, 1942, the tribunal found all 8 defendants guilty and sentenced them to death. The sentence was final. However, Roosevelt, exercising his prerogative of mercy, commuted the sentences of Dash and Berger, acknowledging their cooperation with the FBI and recognizing their role in dismantling the plot. Dash was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment and Berger to life. On August 8, 1942, the remaining 6 saboteurs were executed by electric chair in the District of Columbia jail, their lives extinguished, their dreams of destruction reduced to ashes, and their bodies buried in an unmarked grave, a final act of anonymity. In 1948, Dash and Berger were released from prison, their sentences commuted by President Harry Truman, and they were deported to the US occupation zone of Germany, their lives forever marked by their involvement in Operation Pastorius. Dash later wrote a book about his experiences, attempting to explain his actions to justify his betrayal and to come to terms with his past, and he died in 1991, a broken man. Berger died in 1975, his life a testament to the destructive power of ideology and the enduring consequences of betrayal. The story of Operation Pastorius is a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of extremism, the fragility of loyalty, and the enduring power of the human spirit, the battle between choices and the heavy weight of its outcomes. The shadows of war had reached across the Atlantic, touching American soil, but the darkness had been dispelled, the threat had been neutralized, and the nation had emerged stronger, more united and more determined to defend its